There was a time when Sony's first-party studios were developing games in a staggering amount of time, but it wasn't considered so. Getting a trilogy of Uncharted games in a 4-year span is something that you can't find true appreciation for until we no longer live in a reality where that is possible. Unless this genre of games were to purposefully plateau, the cycles of time required to push the medium forward were always going to get longer. In the time that's passed since, the way the industry functions has become dramatically more complex. It's ever-changing opportunity derived from that complexity that leads to an announcement for a project like The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. You can feel in the air that the stakes are constantly getting higher when releasing a game that costs as much to make as The Last of Us amongst others in its sphere. Stakes that are constantly driven higher by consumers that expect nothing less than the best the industry has to offer with each release. There are far more eyes on these narrative-driven experiences now. Eyes that come from completely different mediums that act with far different intentions. No matter how many people knew it to be true long ago, many video games are starting to get the validation of what are considered more traditional art forms. Naughty Dog have been at the center of these conversations due to how far their IP have made it outside of the medium they were conceptualized in. Uncharted and The Last of Us were strong candidates to transcend their origins. This has put the studio in the most transitional period in their 30-year history, and it hasn't gone unnoticed. The length of time it has been the focus naturally feels longer than what many were used to during Uncharted's run or any of their IP in general. There was a 3-year gap between The Lost Legacy and Part 2, and it's been 3 years since Part 2 launched. In an ideal world, there would be an original Last of Us game via factions launching this year. Only due to the delay of their multiplayer project have Naughty Dog appeared to have lowered their output for the first time in almost a decade. In place of this occurring, they've been able to get out the Legacy of Thieves collection and The Last of Us Part 1, both of which serve a far greater purpose than the assumption that these exist exclusively to take advantage of an audience. The idea that the existence of The Last of Us Part 1 or Part 2 Remastered have drastically somehow changed the release schedule for a new IP or Last of Us 3 is unlikely. While a lot went into these, they were produced to unify a narrative journey and make The Last of Us as coherent and accessible as possible for new audiences. There has been a much bigger plan unfolding around the IP than was previously thought to be possible, and it's working, regardless of how the situation has to appear to the general public for now. It's clear Naughty Dog has every intention of seeing how far it can go. We're in uncharted territory with this angle on the industry. It's hard to take issue with Naughty Dog trying to break down more walls by seeing how far The Last of Us can reach, when breaking down walls is what got them in such a prominent position in the industry. This is a very interesting experiment in how far an IP can go. The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered was inevitable. It was the clear next step in between seasons 1 and 2 of the HBO show. While it was long rumored a PS5 version was imminent, the determining factor of its worth has always been up in the air. As it stands right now, there still isn't another game in its genre that is on a technical level as impressive as The Last of Us Part 2. It would not be unusual to wonder what Naughty Dog can do to enhance a game many have still not caught up to. It's been said to feature native 4K support and 1440/60, however, more interestingly, it's said to feature increased texture resolution, increased level of detail in distances, and higher end shadows. To what extent this is implemented can vary greatly. There's always room for improvement here as years have passed. What's expected is a similar approach to what was done with the Legacy of Thieves collection. Maximized performance on better hardware without changing anything too deeply, likely even picking up some new techniques that were implemented in The Last of Us Part 1. The game will undoubtedly show its improvements environmentally more than what can be seen so far in cutscenes. The Last of Us Part 2 is always going to come with a level of pushback from certain individuals on the internet. This remaster of Part 2 is just Part 1 in a multi-year revisiting of everyone's moral compass. The conversation will be expanded by how Season 2 of the show amplifies what's already taken place. It's so important to the integrity of this story that the show does not divert away from the ugly nature of The Last of Us's world. Events need to happen on schedule. Regardless of the emerging hostility that comes with both bringing back Part 2 and then adapting it, Naughty Dog should stay the course. People were so quick to discredit an entire body of work because they didn't take to a single project. If one story doesn't resonate with you, it doesn't mean the ones that did are negatively affected. This is a situation that will go on forever, and if what happened in 2020 felt like a lot, and from January of 2024 up until Season 2 in 2025, it won't look much different. However, The Last of Us is a much bigger IP than it was when Part 2 launched. The remaster and Season 2 are going to be released under completely different circumstances. There are millions of people that have no clue any of this ever happened. There has never been a greater moment of ignorance is bliss. They experienced the show and are either waiting for Season 2 or sought out a different medium to get the story so far. What's happened with this game, the reception, the sales, the impact, while impressive, it's all insignificant when comparing to what's possible in a post-HBO world. The idea that releasing this remaster is a disservice becomes tiring when it's simply additive to what comes next. An upgrade path via a $10 fee is more than fair. The Last of Us Part 1 came 10 years after its first launch and was fully reworked from the ground up. Providing a similar upgrade path was never going to equal out given the amount of work done. The Last of Us 2 Remastered finishes off the internal goal of complete parity across the series. There is nothing left to bring forward. All that remains is a couple missing pieces. Factions has been through it. It's unclear where it stands in the grand scheme of things at this point. There's too much work that has gone into it to assume it will never materialize in some form in the next couple years. It's PlayStation's #1 shot at a successful live service game down to its DNA. There is one gap left to fill before Season 2 begins. It would be wise for Factions to find itself in that spot. The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered feels like it's coming out at the right time to remind you that things are still happening with this IP. There is no telling how long it will be until a Part 3 exists in any form. All roads lead to finishing this IP between it and the show. From there only is where you will begin to see Naughty Dog's next chapter.